The howling wind carried secrets across the vast Montana territory, but none as desperate as the one Wyatt Prescott discovered on that bitter December evening in 1874. Blood stained the fresh snow beneath his horse's hooves as he tracked a wounded deer through the growing blizzard, miles from the small settlement of Utica where he'd made his temporary home. Wyatt pulled his collar tighter against the cold, his weathered face numb beneath his wide-brimmed hat. At 32, he'd seen enough winters to know this one had teeth. The deer tracks were growing fainter with each passing minute as the snowfall intensified. He'd been trailing the wounded animal for nearly an hour, determined not to let good meat go to waste when the townsfolk were already struggling with dwindling supplies. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper, snorted and tossed his head nervously. Wyatt patted the animal's neck. "What's got you spooked, boy?" Then he heard it barely audible above the wind's mournful cry, the faint sound of a woman's voice. Not shouting for help as one might expect, but singing. Wyatt reined Copper toward the sound, abandoning the deer trail. As they crested a small rise, he spotted a dilapidated cabin nestled against a stand of pines. Smoke trickled weakly from its chimney, a fragile sign of life in the gathering darkness. He approached cautiously, years of frontier living having taught him that isolated cabins often held dangerous secrets. Drawing closer, the singing grew clearer, a lullaby, soft and sweet, though occasionally broken by what sounded like a suppressed sob. Wyatt dismounted, tied Copper to a nearby pine, and retrieved his rifle and saddlebags. He'd been planning to return to town with venison, but the small parcel of jerky, cornmeal, and coffee he carried would have to suffice for whoever was inside the cabin. The wooden steps creaked beneath his boots as he approached the door. He knocked firmly, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. The singing stopped abruptly. Silence stretched for several moments before a tremulous voice called out, "Who's there?" "Name's Wyatt Prescott, madam." "Just passing through and heard singing. Wanted to make sure everything's all right." More silence followed before the sound of shuffling footsteps approached the door. It opened a crack, revealing a sliver of a woman's face, one blue eye, hollow-cheeked and wary, peering out at him. "What do you want?" Her voice was hoarse, as if she'd been using it too much or too little. Wyatt removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. "Just checking if you need assistance. Storm's getting worse, not safe to be out here without proper supplies." The woman hesitated, then opened the door wider. She was small, painfully thin, with honey blonde hair hanging limply around a face that might once have been beautiful before hunger and hardship had carved sharp lines into it. She couldn't have been more than 25. "I don't have anything worth stealing," she said, one arm protectively cradling a bundle against her chest. From the bundle came a weak whimper. Wyatt's eyes moved to the infant and understanding dawned. "I'm not here to take anything, madam. I've got some provisions I can spare." He gestured to his saddlebags. "May I come in? It's mighty cold out here." The woman's gaze darted between his face and the saddlebags. Desperation eventually won over caution. She stepped back, allowing him entry. The cabin's interior was as bleak as Wyatt feared. A meager fire struggled in the hearth, providing more smoke than heat. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a small bed in the corner constituted the entirety of the furniture. The walls had gaps where the chinking had fallen away, and snow dusted the floor beneath them. "I'm Nora." "Nora Reed," the woman said, closing the door behind him, "and this is Emily." She adjusted the bundle, revealing a tiny face, no more than a few months old. The baby's cheeks were flushed with fever, her breathing labored. "Your husband?" Wyatt asked, setting his rifle against the wall and placing his saddlebags on the table. Nora's face hardened. "Gone, 3 weeks now, said he was going to Utica for supplies. Never came back." Wyatt had been in Utica for nearly a month, and hadn't heard of anyone fitting her description of Thomas. Read, a tall man with a scar along his jawline. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. "I've been rationing what little we had left," Nora continued, returning to the rocking chair beside the fire. "But it wasn't enough. Milk dried up days ago. Her voice cracked. Been melting snow for water, feeding her sugar water to keep her going, singing to keep her. She couldn't finish the sentence. Wyatt unpacked his provisions without a word, arranging them on the table. It wasn't much, but it would help. I was tracking a deer before I found your cabin. If you'll permit me to stay until morning, I'll go hunting at first light. Nora looked up at him, suspicion warring with desperate hope in her eyes. Why would you help us? Wyatt considered her question seriously. My mother raised me to believe we're put on this earth to help one another through the hard times, and these look like hard times, Mrs. Reed. Miss, she corrected softly, we never married. Thomas said we would, but… She trailed off, gently rocking the fussing infant. Wyatt nodded, understanding the rest without needing to hear it. He'd seen it before, men who made promises they had no intention of keeping, leaving women and children to fend for themselves in a merciless frontier. I'll get this fire proper, he said, moving to the hearth. He worked efficiently, rebuilding the fire with the remaining logs while Nora watched, her eyes never leaving him as if he might vanish like a mirage. As warmth finally began to fill the cabin, Wyatt boiled water and prepared a thin cornmeal porridge. Not much, but it'll help your milk come back, he explained, handing her a bowl. Nora balanced the baby in one arm and took the bowl with her free hand. She ate slowly, savoring each spoonful as if it were the finest meal ever prepared. When she finished, she looked up at him with tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, the words containing the weight of 1,000 unspoken ones. Wyatt merely nodded and busied himself making a pallet on the floor beside the fire. Outside, the storm howled with renewed fury, rattling the cabin's fragile walls. Mr. Prescott, Nora said as he settled onto his makeshift bed, I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this kindness. Wyatt pulled his blanket up to his chin, gazing into the dancing flames. Get some rest, Miss Reed. Tomorrow will be better. As he drifted towards sleep, the sound of Nora's lullaby filled the cabin once more, but this time without the desperate edge of earlier. For tonight at least, hope had found its way through the storm. Dawn broke gray and cold, the storm having moved on during the night, leaving behind a pristine landscape of snow. Wyatt rose early, rekindling the fire before Nora and the baby stirred. He left a note explaining he'd gone hunting and would return by midday. The hunting was good. With the storm cleared, deer had emerged to forage, and Wyatt managed to take down a young buck not far from the cabin. He field-dressed it efficiently, grateful for the meat it would provide. Returning to the cabin with a quarter of the dressed deer, Wyatt found Nora awake and looking marginally better than the previous evening. The baby was nursing, a sight that brought unexpected relief. Milk came back this morning, Nora explained, a hint of color in her cheeks. Emily's already stronger, Wyatt nodded, pleased. I've brought venison. We can dry some for keeping, make stew with the rest. Over the next 3 days, a routine developed. Wyatt hunted, chopped firewood, and repaired the cabin's most critical deficiencies. Nora cooked, cared for Emily, and gradually regained her strength. They spoke little at first, but as Nora's trust grew, so did her willingness to share her story. She was 23, the daughter of a shopkeeper from St. Louis. She'd met Thomas Reed when he'd come through selling mining equipment, filled with grand tales of Montana territory and the fortune to be made there. Swept away by his charm and promises of adventure, she'd left with him against her parents' wishes. He wasn't always unkind, Nora said as she stirred the venison stew on the 4th evening. But the frontier changes people. The mining claim didn't pan out. The drinking got worse. Then I got with child. She shrugged, a gesture meant to appear casual but betrayed by the tension in her shoulders. When did you last get word from town? Wyatt asked, whittling a small wooden horse as they sat before the fire. September, maybe. A trapper came through, traded some pelts for my mother's silver brooch. Nora's voice caught. It was the last valuable thing I had. Wyatt considered this information carefully. The pass to Utica will be clear enough in a few days. We should consider going there before another storm hits. Nora's hands stilled. I won't leave you and Emily out here alone, Wyatt said simply, as if it were the most natural conclusion in the world. Not until I know you're situated proper. Tears welled in Nora's eyes. Why are you doing all this for strangers? Wyatt set down his knife and the half-finished wooden horse. My wife and son died of fever 5 years back in Wyoming. I was away driving cattle by the time I got home. He cleared his throat. I've wondered since then if someone had been there to help, might they have lived. It was the most he'd spoken of his past since arriving, and the words hung heavy between them. Nora reached across the space separating them and touched his hand briefly. I'm sorry for your loss, she said softly. Wyatt nodded, returning to his whittling. Get some rest, Miss Reed. We've got preparations to make if we're heading to town. The journey to Utica took most of a day. Wyatt fashioned a travois for his horse to pull Nora and Emily, bundling them in every available blanket against the cold. The baby, stronger now but still fragile, slept nestled against her mother's chest throughout most of the journey. Utica in winter was hardly impressive, a collection of wooden buildings huddled together against the elements, smoke rising from chimneys, and the occasional figure hurrying between structures. But to Nora, who had seen nothing but her isolated cabin for months, it seemed a metropolis. Wyatt led them directly to the boarding house run by Mrs. Abigail Thompson, a stern widow with a reputation for fairness and discretion. He paid for a week's lodging in advance. I don't know how I'll ever repay you, Nora said as she settled into the small but clean room, Emily asleep in a proper cradle borrowed from Mrs. Thompson. There's no debt between us, Wyatt assured her. I'll check on you tomorrow, try to get some rest. Word traveled quickly in a town the size of Utica. By the following morning, several women had visited Nora, bringing spare clothes, a cradle quilt, and offers of assistance. The town doctor examined Emily, pronouncing her underweight but recovering well with proper care. Wyatt, meanwhile, inquired discreetly about Thomas Reed. The barkeeper at the Golden Spur recalled a man fitting his description who'd spent several days drinking heavily before joining a group headed for the goldfields near Helena. No one expected he would return. A week stretched into 2. Wyatt secured work at the livery stable while Nora, regaining her strength, began helping at Mrs. Thompson's boarding house in exchange for continued lodging. Emily grew plumper, her cries stronger, her blue eyes so like her mother's more alert. Wyatt found himself inventing reasons to visit the boarding house daily. He told himself it was merely to ensure Nora and Emily were faring well, but Mrs. Thompson's knowing glances suggested she saw through this pretense. Miss Reed seems to be settling in, the older woman remarked one evening as Wyatt sat in her kitchen, ostensibly waiting for Nora to finish putting Emily down for the night. She's a quick learner, good with figures too, been helping me with the books. Wyatt nodded, turning his hat in his hands. She's a capable woman, Mrs. Thompson gave him a shrewd look, and pretty too now that she's got some meat back on her bones. Wyatt felt his neck grow warm. I hadn't noticed, he lied. Mrs. Thompson snorted. Course you haven't, and I'm the Queen of England. Before Wyatt could formulate a response, Nora appeared in the doorway, her honey blonde hair neatly pinned up, wearing a borrowed dress that, while simple, complemented her recovering figure far better than the ragged garments from the cabin. Emily's finally asleep, she announced with a tired smile. She fought it like she was afraid to miss something exciting. Stubborn like her mother, Wyatt observed with a slight smile. Nora laughed, the sound still rare enough to draw both Wyatt's and Mrs. Thompson's full attention. I prefer to call it determination. Mrs. Thompson rose with a theatrical yawn. Well, I'm off to bed. Don't you young people stay up too late now. She shuffled from the kitchen with a wink at Wyatt that made him want to sink through the floor. Alone now, an awkward silence fell between them. Nora busied herself making tea while Wyatt continued the thorough examination of his hat brim. Mrs. Thompson says you've been asking about work for me at the general store, Nora said finally, setting a steaming cup before him. Wyatt nodded. Mr. Wilson needs help with inventory and correspondence. Said your handwriting on that thank you note to his wife impressed him. That's very thoughtful of you, Nora said, sitting across from him, but I don't want to be a burden you feel obligated to carry. Wyatt looked up sharply. You're not a burden, Miss Reed. Nora, she corrected gently. After everything, I think you've earned the right to use my given name. Nora, Wyatt repeated, the name feeling right on his tongue. And I'm Wyatt, not Mr. Prescott, she smiled, wrapping her hands around her teacup. Wyatt, then, I need to know something. What happens when you move on? You never struck me as the type to settle in one place for long. The question caught him off guard with its directness and insight. I've been drifting since I lost my family, he admitted. Never stayed anywhere longer than a season. And now, her blue eyes held his steadily, Wyatt considered the question seriously. Now I'm not sure what I want, except, she prompted when he fell silent. Except I find myself wanting to see Emily's first steps, hear her first words. He swallowed hard. See you smile more often. Color bloomed in Nora's cheeks. She looked down at her tea. I'm not in a position to offer anything in return for all you've done. I have no money, no prospects beyond what you've helped arrange. I've never asked for anything in return, Wyatt reminded her. That's what makes it harder, Nora said softly. Any other man would have expected something, understanding dawned. Wyatt reached across the table and gently touched her hand. I'm not any other man, Nora. And you don't owe me anything, least of all that. Tears glistened in her eyes. Then what is this, between us? Wyatt wished he had a simple answer. I don't rightly know, but I'd like to find out if you're willing. February melted into March, and the first tentative signs of spring began appearing around Utica. Wyatt continued working at the livery while Nora split her time between the boarding house and the general store, where Mr. Wilson had indeed hired her for her neat handwriting and quick mind with figures. Their courtship for that was what it had become, though neither had formally acknowledged it progressed slowly. Wyatt joined Nora and Emily for supper several times a week. On Sundays, weather permitting, they would walk together through town, Wyatt carrying Emily while townspeople nodded approvingly. Emily thrived under their joint care. At 6 months, she was sitting up, reaching for objects, and laughing a musical sound that never failed to bring smiles to both adults' faces. She had Nora's blue eyes and fair coloring, but as Nora sometimes noted with a shadow crossing her face, Thomas's strong chin and determined expression. On a particularly mild April evening, Wyatt took Nora on a proper outing, leaving Emily in Mrs. Thompson's capable hands. They rode Copper to a bluff overlooking the valley, where Wyatt had prepared a simple picnic. It's beautiful, Nora breathed, taking in the vista of greening grasslands and distant snow-capped mountains. I'd forgotten how big the sky is. Wyatt spread the blanket he'd brought and unpacked their meal: freshly baked bread, cheese, early spring berries, and a small jar of honey that had cost him nearly a day's wages at the general store. They ate companionably, talking of small things: Emily's progress, town gossip, plans for a new schoolhouse. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the valley, Wyatt found himself speaking of things he'd kept buried for years. Sarah, my wife, she loved evenings like this, he said, gazing toward the horizon. Said it was when you could see the world changing, becoming something new right before your eyes. Nora listened quietly, letting him speak at his own pace. Our boy, James, was just learning to run when the fever took them, 4 years old and faster than a jackrabbit. Wyatt smiled at the memory. I was 2 days' ride away when the message reached me by the time I got home. He cleared his throat. The neighbor woman had already laid them out, ready for burying. Nora's hand found his, warm and reassuring. I can't imagine your pain, couldn't face staying there, sold the ranch, took to drifting. Thought if I kept moving, the memories wouldn't catch up. Wyatt turned to look at her directly. Didn't work, of course, carried them with me everywhere. And now, Nora asked softly, now I'm starting to think maybe there's room for new memories alongside the old ones. He squeezed her hand gently. If you're willing to help make them. Nora's eyes widened slightly. Wyatt, are you saying? He nodded, suddenly nervous as a schoolboy. I know it hasn't been that long and you're just getting back on your feet. I don't want to rush you, but I've come to care for you and Emily something fierce. A tear slipped down Nora's cheek. What about Thomas, if he came back? Wyatt's expression hardened slightly. From what I've gathered, he's not coming back, and if he did, he'd have me to answer to for abandoning you both. Nora searched his face. I care for you too, Wyatt, more than I thought possible after everything. But Emily isn't yours, she could be, Wyatt interrupted gently. If you'd allow it, I already love her as if she were my own. More tears fell now. You would do that? Take on another man's child, she's your child, Nora, that's all that matters to me. Wyatt reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver band. I'm not a man of fancy words, but I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife, making a family with me, you, me, and Emily. Nora stared at the ring, emotions warring on her face. I need to be sure, she whispered. For Emily's sake, that this isn't just gratitude or obligation I'm feeling. Wyatt nodded, understanding. He returned the ring to his pocket. I'll wait, Nora, however long you need. The ride back to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the boarding house, Wyatt helped Nora down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for a lovely evening, Nora said, looking up at him with eyes still reflective from unshed tears. Wyatt nodded, tipping his hat. Good night, Nora. Give Emily a kiss from me. He turned to leave, but Nora caught his arm. Rising on tiptoe, she pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Good night, Wyatt, she whispered before hurrying inside, leaving him standing in the street with his heart hammering against his ribs. Spring progressed rapidly after that evening. Wyatt respected Nora's need for time, maintaining their routine of shared meals and Sunday walks but never pressing for an answer to his proposal. Privately, he began making arrangements, purchasing a small plot of land on the outskirts of Utica, where a sturdy cabin had been abandoned by a family heading further west. The work of repairing and expanding the cabin gave him purpose, filling the hours when he wasn't at the livery or with Nora and Emily. He added a second small bedroom, replaced the roof, and constructed a proper porch where one could sit and watch the sunset over the mountains. Nora noticed his absences but didn't question them directly. There was a new tension between them, not unpleasant, but expectant, like the air before a summer storm. Emily continued growing, now pulling herself up on furniture and babbling a constant stream of nearly words. Ma was clear enough to make Nora's eyes shine with pride. And occasionally, when Wyatt entered a room, a sound remarkably like "why" would bubble from the baby's lips. In late May, the annual Founders' Day dance was held in the newly completed schoolhouse. The entire town turned out, dressed in their finest, for an evening of music, food, and community celebration. Wyatt arrived at the boarding house in a freshly pressed shirt, his boots polished to a shine, hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. When Nora appeared with Emily on her hip, he momentarily lost the ability to speak. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes perfectly, her honey blonde hair arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. Emily was dressed in a tiny white frock with a blue ribbon that complemented her mother's attire. You look. Wyatt cleared his throat. Beautiful doesn't seem adequate. Nora blushed, the color enhancing her already considerable beauty. Mrs. Thompson helped with the dress. Said it was high time I had something pretty to wear. Remind me to thank her, Wyatt said, offering his arm. They walked to the schoolhouse together, joining the flow of townsfolk headed in the same direction. Inside, lanterns cast a warm glow over the wooden floor cleared for dancing. A small band of local musicians played lively tunes while tables laden with food and drink lined the walls. Mrs. Thompson intercepted them almost immediately, holding out her arms for Emily. I'll take this little one for a while. You young people go enjoy yourselves." Before either could protest, the older woman had whisked Emily away toward a group of admiring matrons, leaving Wyatt and Nora standing awkwardly at the edge of the dance floor. "Would you care to dance?" Wyatt asked formally, extending his hand. Nora hesitated. "I'm afraid I'm rather out of practice." "That makes two of us," Wyatt assured her with a smile. "We can be clumsy together." They moved onto the floor just as the band struck up a waltz. Wyatt placed one hand respectfully at Nora's waist, taking her hand with the other. Despite their mutual disclaimers, they moved well together, finding a natural rhythm that carried them smoothly around the room. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Prescott," Nora teased as he guided her through a turn. "Where does a cowboy learn to waltz?" "My mother insisted her sons be gentlemen as well as horsemen," Wyatt explained, a fond smile touching his lips at the memory. "Said you never know when such skills might come in handy." "Wise woman," Nora murmured, her eyes never leaving his. They danced 3 more dances before taking a break for refreshments. As Wyatt fetched punch, he overheard 2 women talking nearby. Such a lovely couple, and after all they've been through. "Mrs. Thompson says he's fixed up the old Peterson cabin for them, just waiting on her to say yes." Wyatt moved away quickly, hoping Nora hadn't heard the gossip. When he returned with their drinks, however, she was looking at him with a curious expression. "Is it true?" she asked without preamble. "About the Peterson cabin," Wyatt sighed, setting down the cups. "I wanted it to be a surprise. Figured you and Emily deserved a proper home, whether or not." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Nora's expression softened. "Show me," she said simply. "Now, but the dance, please, Wyatt. I want to see it," after retrieving Emily from Mrs. Thompson's care, accompanied by a knowing wink from the older woman, they walked the short distance to the edge of town. The night was clear, a full moon illuminating their path and casting the cabin in silver light. It looked better than Wyatt had dared hope, solid, welcoming, with smoke curling from the chimney where he'd lit a small fire earlier to take the evening chill off the interior. "You kept a fire going even though you weren't here?" Nora asked as they approached. Wyatt shrugged. "Wanted it to be warm if I ever got the chance to show it to you." The inside was simple but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, sturdy table and chairs, a small sofa covered with a quilt, and 2 doors leading to separate bedrooms. "This one would be Emily's eventually," Wyatt explained, showing her the smaller room with a handcrafted crib. "But I figured she'd stay with you for now." Nora walked through the cabin in silence, taking in the small touches that spoke of careful planning: shelves for books, hooks by the door for coats, a rocking chair beside the fire similar to the one from her old cabin. "You did all this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Wyatt nodded, suddenly unsure. "Is it? Do you like it?" Nora turned to face him, Emily dozing against her shoulder. In the firelight, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "No one has ever done anything like this for me before." "You deserve it," Wyatt said simply. "Both of you do." Nora gently laid Emily on the quilt-covered sofa, arranging cushions to keep her from rolling. Then she stepped toward Wyatt, determination in every line of her body. "I've had my time to think," she said softly. "To be sure, this isn't just gratitude." Wyatt's heart pounded in his chest. And I love you, Wyatt Prescott. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you appeared at my door like an answer to prayers I'd been too afraid to speak aloud." Wyatt reached for her hand, hope rising in his chest. "Nora, wait please, let me finish." She took a deep breath. "I need you to understand what you're getting with me. I'm not the innocent girl who left St. Louis. I've made mistakes, trusted too easily. Emily is the one good thing that came from those mistakes, and she'll always come first for me." "As she should," Wyatt agreed solemnly, "if you still want me, knowing all that." Nora's voice wavered slightly. "Then yes, I will marry you." Joy surged through Wyatt like a flash flood, powerful and overwhelming. He pulled Nora into his arms, lifting her feet clear off the floor in his enthusiasm. "Yes," he breathed against her hair. Yes, I still want you, more than anything." When he set her down, Nora was laughing through her tears. "I should warn you, I'm a terrible cook." Wyatt grinned, reaching into his pocket for the silver band he'd carried every day since the picnic. "I reckon we won't starve. Between the two of us, we'll figure it out." He slipped the ring onto her finger, marveling at how right it looked there. "I promise to love you and Emily until my dying day, Nora Reed, to protect you, provide for you, and never leave you to face hardship alone." Nora looked up at him, her face radiant with happiness. "And I promise to love you faithfully, to make a home with you, and to remind you every day that you are a blessing we never expected but desperately needed." Their first kiss as an engaged couple was sweet and tender, a promise sealed beneath the wooden beams of what would soon be their family home. On the sofa, Emily stirred and whimpered softly. Nora moved to comfort her, lifting the baby into her arms. "Shh, sweet girl. Everything's all right now." Wyatt watched them, his heart full to bursting. "Better than all right," he murmured, joining them to stroke Emily's soft cheek. "Everything's just beginning." They were married 2 weeks later in the Utica church with nearly the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Thompson stood proudly as Nora's matron of honor, while Mr. Wilson from the general store served as Wyatt's best man. Emily, dressed in white and sporting a crown of spring wildflowers, was held alternately by both during the ceremony. As they spoke their vows, Wyatt found himself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had led him to that isolated cabin during a winter storm. Had he continued tracking the wounded deer, had the wind blown in a different direction masking Nora's singing, their paths might never have crossed. The celebration afterward was joyous, with food and dancing lasting well into the evening. When it came time for them to leave, the townspeople lined the street, offering good wishes and playful advice as they made their way to their new home. The cabin, now officially the Prescott family home, welcomed them with the warm glow of lanterns that Mrs. Thompson had arranged to have lit in their absence. Emily, exhausted from the day's excitement, fell asleep almost immediately in her crib, leaving the newlyweds to begin their life together in precious privacy. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Nora nestled against Wyatt's chest. She asked the question that had lingered in her mind for months. "Do you ever regret finding us, taking on someone else's responsibilities?" Wyatt's arms tightened around her. "Not for a single moment. You and Emily aren't responsibilities to me, Nora. You're gifts I never thought to receive." She raised herself on one elbow to look down at him, her hair falling like a curtain around them. "I used to sing to Emily every night in that cabin, telling her we would survive somehow. I never imagined survival would look like this, like happiness. We've both been given a second chance," Wyatt said, reaching up to trace her cheekbone with gentle fingers. "I aim to make the most of it." Summer turned to fall, and Utica prepared for another winter, though this one approached with none of the dread Nora had felt the previous year. The Prescott home was well stocked, the roof solid, the walls properly chinked against the coming cold. Emily took her first steps just after her first birthday, toddling precariously from Nora's hands to Wyatt's outstretched arms, her face a picture of concentration and determination. When she reached him safely, his whoop of joy startled her so badly she sat down hard, looking bewildered until both adults dissolved into laughter. In November, Nora confirmed what she'd suspected for several weeks: they were expecting a child in late spring. Wyatt's response was to lift her off her feet and spin her around the kitchen until she was dizzy with laughter. "Emily will have a brother or sister," he said in wonder, placing a reverent hand on Nora's still flat stomach. Our child, Nora echoed, covering his hand with hers. "Though you know Emily is just as much yours in every way that matters," Wyatt nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "From the moment I first held her, she was mine in my heart." Winter arrived with less ferocity than the previous year, but still brought its share of storms. During one particularly fierce blizzard, as they sat before the fire with Emily playing on a quilt at their feet, Wyatt shared something he'd been considering. "I received a letter from my brother in Wyoming last week," he began, watching Nora's reaction carefully. "He's offered me a partnership in his ranch, says it's too much for him to manage alone since his son's moved to Denver." Nora's hands stilled in her mending. "Wyoming, that's quite a distance." "It is," Wyatt agreed, "but it's good land with a solid house already built. Room for the children to grow." He reached for her hand. "I told him I'd discuss it with my wife. When would we need to decide?" Nora asked, her expression thoughtful rather than resistant. "Spring would be the earliest we could travel after the baby comes." Wyatt squeezed her fingers gently. "I know Utica has become home to you. If you want to stay, we will." Nora was quiet for a long moment, watching Emily stack wooden blocks only to knock them down with delighted giggles. "When I came west with Thomas, I thought I was chasing adventure," she said finally. "What I found instead was hardship and betrayal." Wyatt waited, knowing there was more. "But then you found us," Nora continued, meeting his eyes. "And I learned that home isn't a place, it's the people who stand beside you through whatever comes." She smiled, the expression reaching all the way to her eyes. "If Wyoming is where our future lies, then that's where we'll make our home." Wyatt felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "We'll build something good there, Nora, I promise. We already have something good, Wyatt. Wherever we go, we'll take it with us." Their son, William Thomas Prescott, was born on a clear May morning in 1876, with Emily watching wide-eyed as Mrs. Thompson placed the swaddled infant in Nora's arms. "He looks like you," Nora said tiredly, smiling up at Wyatt, who sat beside her on the bed, one arm supporting her shoulders. "Poor boy," Wyatt joked, voice thick with emotion as he touched his son's tiny hand. "Let's hope he gets your looks instead." Emily climbed onto the bed, curious about this new addition to their family. "Baby?" she asked, pointing at her brother. "Yes, sweetheart," Nora confirmed. "This is your brother, William. Can you say William?" "Willa," Emily attempted, bringing fresh tears to both parents' eyes. 2 weeks later, with William growing stronger daily and Emily chattering constantly about "my Willa," they packed their belongings into a sturdy wagon Wyatt had purchased for the journey. The townspeople of Utica gathered to see them off, presenting gifts and extracting promises to write, Mrs. Thompson hugged Nora fiercely. "You'll do just fine," the older woman assured her. "You're the strongest young woman I've ever known, and you've got a good man beside you." As they pulled away from Utica, Emily waving enthusiastically from her perch on Nora's lap, William sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle secured in the wagon bed, Wyatt reached over to take his wife's hand. "Any regrets?" he asked, nodding toward the town growing smaller behind them. Nora shook her head, squeezing his fingers. "Not one. Every step, even the painful ones, led us here together." The journey to Wyoming was long but manageable, undertaken in easy stages to accommodate the children. By mid-June, they crested a rise and saw below them the sprawling ranch that would be their new home, green pastures dotted with cattle. A large 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch, barns and outbuildings speaking of prosperity and permanence. Jacob Prescott, Wyatt's older brother, greeted them with open arms, immediately enchanted by Emily's chatter and William's solemn gaze. That evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold, Nora leaned against Wyatt's shoulder. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, William nursing contentedly in her arms while Emily played with wooden animals Jacob had carved for her. "I can see why you love this country." Wyatt pressed a kiss to her temple. "The land's just scenery, Nora. You and the children, you're home." 10 years later, the Prescott Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the county. Wyatt and Jacob had expanded their operation, adding horses to their cattle business and acquiring additional grazing lands. The farmhouse had been enlarged to accommodate Wyatt and Nora's growing family. William had been joined by twin sisters, Sarah and Abigail, and another brother, Joseph. Emily, now 11, had blossomed into a bright, confident girl who excelled in the local school and could ride as well as any boy in the county. She called Wyatt Pa without hesitation, though she knew the story of her birth father. To her, family was defined by love and presence, not merely blood. On a crisp autumn evening, as Nora sat on the porch shelling peas while the younger children played in the yard, Emily emerged from the house with a small wooden box. "Ma," she said, sitting beside Nora on the bench, "I found this in the attic while helping Aunt Martha clean. It has your maiden name on it." Nora set aside her work and took the box, running her fingers over the faded letters carved into the lid. "N. Reed. I'd forgotten about this," she said softly. "I packed it the day we left Montana." Emily watched curiously as her mother opened the box. Inside lay a few small treasures of faded ribbon, a tarnished locket, a small book of poetry, and beneath them, a folded piece of paper. Nora carefully unfolded the paper, revealing a sketch of a tiny cabin nestled against pine trees, smoke curling from its chimney. "What is that?" Emily asked, leaning closer. "The place where your pa found us," Nora explained, her voice catching slightly. "I drew it so I would never forget, though truthfully I don't think I ever could." Emily studied the sketch thoughtfully. "Was it scary being alone there with me?" Nora put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "It was the scariest time of my life, but it also brought us the greatest blessing we could have hoped for." "Pa," Emily said with certainty. Nora nodded, smiling as she spotted Wyatt walking up from the barn, Joseph on his shoulders, the twins skipping alongside him, and William proudly carrying a saddle bag as if it contained treasure. "When I was at my lowest point, singing to you because I had nothing else to offer, he appeared like something from a dream, bringing food and hope." Nora squeezed Emily's shoulders. "Sometimes the darkest moments lead us to exactly where we're meant to be." As Wyatt approached, his face lighting up at the sight of them, Nora tucked the sketch back into the box. This man who had once been a stranger had become the center of their world, creating a family from what could have been tragedy. "What are my favorite girls discussing so seriously?" Wyatt asked, setting Joseph down to run to his mother. Emily grinned up at him. "Ma was just telling me how you rescued us like a knight in a fairy tale." Wyatt laughed, leaning down to kiss Nora's cheek. "Is that so? Seems to me I'm the one who got rescued that day. Found a purpose I'd been missing for years." As the children clamored for attention, Wyatt sat beside Nora, taking her hand in his. In the distance, the sun began to set over the mountains, casting the same golden light that had illuminated their first evening as a married couple. "I love you, Nora Prescott," Wyatt said quietly, the words no less heartfelt for having been spoken countless times over the years. Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, surrounded by the family they had built together from the most unlikely beginning. "And I love you, my rescuer, my partner, my home." In the yard, the children's laughter rose like music on the evening air, the sweetest sound either of them could imagine, and one that had begun with a desperate lullaby in a lonely cabin so many years before.